My name is Mike Finley. I'm with a startup company called Answer Rocket. We're based out of Atlanta. And the title of the topic is Jet Ski on Your Data Lake. I'm going to talk about some patent pending technologies from Answer Rocket and also about a broad problem that's not just one that Answer Rocket solves, but that you'll identify with yourself. So I do have 48 slides for the next 7 minutes. So just kidding. We have 7 minutes of slides and about a 3-minute product demonstration to take you through. Thanks for your attention. So we start by identifying something fairly familiar to all of us, which is the world's neatest data room. Of course, none of them ever looked quite like this, but this represents the success of big data. These very large data centers are deployed with enormous amounts of equipment and expense, and they're successful. They're great at making solutions to problems come about because of all the things that big data does for us. And there's kind of an embarrassment of riches in the sense for big data, which is that it creates a meta problem. The meta problem is that there are a few different stakeholders or key aspects of this that are constantly in transition. Your data, your users, and your questions are increasing. Why? Because the ones that we asked before got good answers, so we want more answers. We want more ways of being profitable. We want more insights. And at the same time, the amount of time that we have to answer these questions and the budget that's allocated per question or per user is going down over time. So how do we solve this problem? How do we get through to the bottom of it in a way that serves the enterprise better? Well, to answer the question about the future, we need to look at where we came from. And so this is kind of the data center of yesteryear, right? We take all the data, we scrub it, we put it in the right format, we raise it to the top of a tower, we plumb it into all the right places, and that services the users, right? And this is kind of the classic story of the enterprise data warehouse and kind of the very highly scrubbed OLAP scenario where you've got a lot of preconditioning that happens that ultimately creates a solution where you can deliver a limited amount of goodness to all of your users. But and in that model, it was basically the users talking to analysts who understood how to do analysis, which then addressed the data. A pretty familiar pipeline for all of us, and that fundamentally is a pipeline that needs to scale up in this environment of the data lake. But the data lake is a little bit different problem, right? It's not something that's highly scrubbed. It's not something that we can carefully put data into. It needs to take in data in real time. It needs to take it in from a lot of different sources. It's not always going to be clean. It's not always going to be scrubbed. And so we have this challenge of not only accessing all that additional data, both accessing it quickly as well as accessing it by a lot of additional users, but we have the fact that there are a whole lot more analysts hitting that data. There are a whole lot more sophisticated analyses being applied against that data, and of course there's a tremendously large amount of increased data in itself. So businesses are investing an enormous amount of money, and this show is a proof positive of that, in trying to solve this problem in a way that scales up to meet all the needs of the enterprise. And in fact, as with anything that's scaling to more and more commoditized kind of end user, end consumer, and anything that's getting this much investment from business, there's actually a very high level of expectations. The expectation is a performance solution. The expectation is a solution that I can drive myself. I can take it where I want it to be. It's ergonomic. It's built for me. It's made to be used by me, the end user who wants it. It's not something unwieldy and large and difficult to use. It's actually this idea of the jet ski on the data lake, right? Well, users already have a paradigm for what they find to be this very fast and very open kind of interaction process, and it's not today. It's search. One moment, while we go the correct direction. Right. It's actually the search paradigm, right? So this idea that you can give me an input box, and I can type in whatever I want, and it's going to give me the answer that I want back, whether that's talking to Siri or talking to a search engine or talking to Pandora. I can tell it the kind of thing that I want, and it does something pretty smart pretty quickly back to me. Well, what if we could do this in a data environment? What if we could ask the question simply the way we want to? What were my sales by dealer in 2015 for dealers with more than some condition, with using natural language terms, using business terms like gross profit, 500K, this kind of last year, all these sort of very familiar terminology. What if I could do that and get an answer back from a BI system? There are other kinds of questions that you could ask out there, like, which store saw an increase in sales related to breakfast? Complicated terms from a data perspective, like increase or promotion, actually are very simple from an end user perspective. I know what the shake promotion was. I know what increase means. How you get that to map into the database, that's another problem. But from an end user perspective, this is the jet ski. This is how they want to operate, how they want to integrate with their data. The reality is very different from a jet ski, right? The reality is a very trained user who is doing very dangerous things. He's very sophisticated. He has a lot of expensive gear. He's probably got a whole lot of sophistication to what he's doing. And in fact, the kinds of questions don't look at all like what were the increase in breakfast sales last year. The questions look more like SQL, right? This is the natural language of the computer, not the natural language of the person. So what we find is very simply that today's tools can't keep up. They can't keep up with the level of demand that's coming from the end business user. The end business user having to go to an analyst to get somebody to write a query. We've invested a lot of money in making the query run really fast against a whole lot of data. What we haven't invested in is making the query itself, creating the query, be something fast, something that ties easily in to the vernacular of the user. So this solution that we're proposing to join up this search-based user experience with the users and the answers and the data that they're after is, of course, simply being able to ask the question you want, what were Brazil's comp sales yesterday, using natural language query. So basically being able to take that question apart and compose a query from it and have that query be able to hit the database right where it is. How is this done? Well, I'll tell you just a very short story about how this is even possible, because it's not something that's very familiar to a lot of folks. The first idea is basically we have to take the question, and if we were going to hit the internet with this question, if we were going to Google the question, there would be 48 possible meanings for it. Brazil could be a place, it could be a product, it could be a thing, right? It could, yesterday could be something that's tied to a song title, it could be something that's tied to a specific product, or it could be a date, right? There are things like sales that could refer to a lot of different things. The idea of comp could mean complementary or comparison. So there are a lot of different meanings for this phrase. But the fact is, in the database, there is only one answer. So the database doesn't care about products called Brazil or places, cities in Idaho called yesterday. It knows that there is one way to answer that question from what the knowledge of the database is, and that's how it produces the answer ultimately out of it. Got a couple of minutes left to show you a brief demonstration, so I'll just let this play through and talk a little bit about the data that we're presenting. Is about 1.5 million transactions from a retail chain over a couple of years, and what we're going to show is the tool actually working interactively with the user. Here it is. Here's Answer Rocket, and you can see it's got the open input question where there's going to be some typing in just a minute. But you can also refer to your recents and your favorites and maybe some shared questions from other users. So we start typing, what was the comp sales growth this year? And as you're typing, you get suggestions for what you might want to mean or what you might want to complete the sentence with. Once you have an answer, you can then view that in a lot of different ways with a lot of different visualizations. And now you can begin exploring it more traditionally by pointing to specific pieces of the data, by drilling down into different parts of the solution. But the key is that you got to this point by using very natural language that may have had a tremendous amount of activity behind it, but ultimately from a business user's perspective was very simple. In this case, we got all the way down to figure out what the 3 most popular brands were at the most successful store in our chain, and now we can choose for that one particular brand. We can choose which products were being purchased the most in this case. So again, a combination of the paradigms of the search engine giving you a very fast open input with some of the more traditional point and click GUI type approaches. What you're seeing here is what we call the overview, which explains how we got the answer. And ultimately, for the data scientists out there, you'll see at the bottom of this the actual SQL query. This is a key part of what our solution does. It takes the natural language and creates a SQL query that hits the data in its location. It doesn't have to be transformed, it doesn't have to be materialized. It just has to exist somewhere with a schema that we understand. Where does it have to exist? Well, there are a number of different locations where you can point AnswerRocket to, and then on any of those, it's able to basically extract the schema and allow the user to then begin interacting, assigning natural language terms, assigning KPIs, assigning certain synonyms, ultimately being able to deliver that business user experience interacting with a real data set. In this case, we see the definition of a few different metrics, and ultimately, the whole tool ties back together, and from an end user perspective, it doesn't have to have any of that complexity. The business user simply sees a tool that's working with them in the terms that they understand, and giving them results in a form that they understand. We're at booth P6. That concludes my 42 slides and 60-minute talk. Thanks for your attention. Please come see us.